I went to law school, all right? I went to law school back in the day. I'm a licensed attorney. I was born and raised in California. I went to UC Davis Law School, public law school in-state, all right? My final year of law school, they decided to raise the tuition, right? So I left law school with, I think, about $55,000 worth of student debt, which comparatively is really good, all right? I graduate. It's friggin' 2008, it's the economic crisis. I come out and I'm like, what the hell? I was promised that, I'd go get this education with this debt and I have a job. Nothing like that happened. Wealth got just destroyed. I had to work my butt off. And then in the meantime, now I look back and I look at the tuitions of UC Davis if you're in state. And I'm like, I couldn't even afford this if I wanted to go to college right now. The whole system seems to benefit, as Danielle was saying, those who are rich and those who are privileged. And this whole thing with the student debt conversation, Kim, that I think people aren't talking about, is like, this is predatory lending. You can't even afford college. And then when you go on this promise of, if you just pull yourself from your bootstraps and get the education and you get the student loan, then you're still punished by society for doing the right thing, right? How do we get to this conversation where we go beyond like this divide and conquer technique and actually tackle the system?
I mean, it's identifying who your enemies are. Like we're saying, it's the system. What does that mean? It's capitalism writ broadly, right? But it's also the banks, it's the politicians, it's the lenders, is every structure and every powerful person who is sort of squatting in the way of you having a decent life. It's not our fellow workers who are oppressing us. It's not them who are signing our paychecks or dictating how much we owe to the government or dictating how the police treat us, because cops aren't workers. It's the people who are in charge. And I think just kind of encouraging a redirect of that very rightful anger towards the people whose boots are actually on our necks. Not the people who are being paid a couple bucks to make the shoelaces. It's the people who are grinding us down. That's where the rage should go. Not because a couple people have to pay a couple bucks less on their one of their many bills a month. Like, it's not their fault that you suffered. It's all these other people who have a lot more power that are ensuring the rest of us keep suffering. That's who you should be mad at.
And what's really interesting, Kim, about what you're saying too, is the fact that this is something that I've also identified about American culture. We have been lied to and gaslit into the understanding of rugged individualism. We do not function as a community or a collective. And this is what is very different to me, particularly about BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, which do function very much about the collective. We are supposed to be, it is supposed to be us that are helping the least among us, right? That shows, who we are as human beings and what we want as a culture. We don't do that in America, right? Like, even when you look at the most wealthy, these multi-billionaires, it's like, oh, they did it on their own. No, they didn't. They did it, to your point, on the backs of many, many, many people. And they already were given millions of dollars to be as a leg up. And so I wonder, what makes republicanism and capitalism be able to function in the way that it does is the pitting of communities against each other. Well, I did and you need to, or you're the one taking so much and that's why I'm suffering. And I'm wondering, through collective bargaining, through unionizing, is there a way for us, particularly in this moment, as work is shifting, how people work is shifting, for us to become more community-minded and actually recognize and identify, to your point, who the real enemy is? It isn't the person I'm sitting next to in my cubicle or I'm standing next to on the factory line, right? It is the oversee and the collection of the system. And I'm just wondering how you think that we go about changing that mindset, shifting that mindset and the messaging that's needed.
So I think one of the most effective ways we can challenge this mindset, we can make change person to person. It sounds kind of simple. It's probably a little on brand for a union guy, right? But unionizing your workplace, organizing with your coworkers, getting to know them, getting to know what struggles you share, what they're dealing with that you're not dealing with, trying to find that common ground and see the problems you need to work on together. Kind of just building that class consciousness, that idea of like, well, we're all doing this job. And then these people in middle management, upper management, whatever, they're doing something else. They're making our lives worse. They're making more money than us. they're where the profit is going. That doesn't seem fair. But, we do have an option to do something about it. If we organize together, we can actually force change. People have done it throughout history. And specifically, I get into it. That's the whole point of my book, getting into how specifically marginalized people, the people with the least power, have used that power of collective organizing, collective bargaining, strikes, pickets, all of the things that come along with being part of a strong labor movement, how they've utilized those tools to force change, and how that's happening right now too. In unionizing a workplace, it's easy to say, yeah, just form a union. It's not that easy in this country. There's all sorts of laws and red tape and societal structures and political structures that make it difficult for people to organize, but it's not impossible. And honestly, thinking back to my experience, like I used to, you were talking about my tattoo appointment earlier, like I spent most of my life in the heavy metal scene, right? But when I was working at Vice 7 years ago, we organized, we unionized because we weren't making any money. We were getting treated terribly. It was for all the reasons people unionize, right? We're fed up. We're sick of this. We're not going to take it anymore. And that totally shifted the way I view myself as a worker and my labor and my place in this world. And it made me get so much more involved in my local community and political organizing in New York. It just kind of cracked open this little shell that I think a lot of us find ourselves squished into because the condition of the American worker is alienation and struggle. And when you're trying so hard just to put food on the table, to take care of your children, your elders, yourself, who has time for anybody else? Well, that's the power of a union. You can make them give you that time, and you can find that time and organize with your coworkers and see the world is so much bigger than me, and these problems are so much bigger than what I'm dealing with right this second. So the only way we can really survive this is to come together and fight collectively, because on our own, we're just sitting ducks.
The challenges are so immense, and we're going to talk about some of these challenges to unionization. But let's talk about a positive story. Crystallizing exactly what you just said. What happened in Amazon, right? Amazon has been trying. I think if we have to identify the good guys and the bad guys, so let's identify them. Amazon, Starbucks. They are terrified right now that workers in this moment, realizing that for the first time perhaps in 40 years, they have some muscle that they can flex, right? They're crushing down right now on any attempts at exactly what you said, when workers like, we have a moment here where we can actually demand better wages. And they underestimated this young black man who was trying to do this in one of their warehouses. And I want you to just take us through that story, how he was able with his friend to actually convince other workers, we have a moment here, we should flex and we should unionize, and how we pulled it off.
And so got a shout out to Chris Smalls, the man of the moment, who with Derek Palmer and Angelica Maldonado and this whole committee of people in Staten Island at this Amazon warehouse, it's kind of a long story, but yeah, short version is they unionized their warehouse of 8,000 people. And the way they did that, they didn't join up with the traditional labor union, because that's an option too. You can do it live, you can do DIY. They decided to organize their own independent union. And the way that they got people to sign union cards and they got them to vote for the union and to ultimately triumph over Amazon's union busting campaign, it sounds so simple again, but it was so effective. They just talked to their coworkers. They met them on a very human scale. This was an effort led by young Black and brown workers who were in a facility predominantly staffed by Black and brown workers. So they were sharing a common language. There was cultural intersections. There was food. There were barbecues in the parking lot. Like, they were able to talk to their coworkers during in the break room and as they're going to from work on the bus. Like, they're able to connect on a very human level that is not always available to organizers from traditional unions, because there's sometimes laws to keep them off the property. But when the union is being organized just worker to worker, purely like that, it's pretty hard to crush. It's hard to say, these people are coming in and trying to change things and mess up our Amazon family, when those people are, that guy Chris that I know from work. Right? That's hard. It's hard to divide and conquer when there's nothing to divide. And so they've really, and actually I do have to shout out, because I spent a lot of time covering the earlier efforts in Alabama and Bessemer. They weren't the first group of workers to try and organize the Amazon facility. They were the first who pulled it off. But those folks in Bessemer, Alabama, they were the first ones to go toe-to-toe with Amazon and try. And they're still in the midst of a legal challenge to their last election. Like, it ain't over down in Alabama, but Staten Island, they pulled it off. And now it's had a little bit of a domino effect. I think it was in Albany just this week, another Amazon facility filed to join the Amazon labor union that Chris Smalls and Derek Palmer and Angelica formed in Staten Island. I think there's also an effort going on in Kentucky, the same thing. Like they've gotten a ton of attention, which is wholeheartedly well deserved, and they've changed history, and it's just really exciting to see, because that kind of David versus Goliath story, like we've kind of been conditioned to assume, oh, well, we're not going to win. They're going to get crushed. Jeff Bezos has more money than God. What are you going to do? But they won. And that is so important, because seeing that happen and seeing them continue to be vocal and to be organized and be very public about this fight, that's inspired other workers to take up the charge and organize their workplaces. Like, you can't put lightning back in a bottle. And like Chris Smalls and the Amazon labor union workers, they are on fire.